This dresser literally was 1 foot in a dumpster. Once a week, I volunteered at salvage center by local landfill, and I found this dresser over there and it was in a dumpster pile. I don't know why they put it over there. It was in pretty good shape except for the top, but I decided this dresser deserved a second chance. So, hi everybody and welcome to another makeover. The only thing that I found was wrong with this dresser was this laminated top, cracked laminated top. First thing first, I removed those broken mirror holders. Maybe they were the reason why they put it in a dumpster. I don't know. And then I took off all hardware. And of course, this dresser needed a good clean because it stayed outside for about 5 or 6 days. Cleaning is a very important step no matter what you're going to do with your piece. I hate cleaning myself and I skip this step in only one single case if I'm going to use a chemical stripper. In the other cases, I clean because the piece can be greasy and it can clog your sandpaper, or there can be dust or even pieces of sand, and I don't want it to get stuck in my sandpaper and cause more damage this piece already has. I was not gonna use the old hardware, so I needed to plug the holes. And I like doing it with wooden plugs, but first I needed to make some. In the past, I used the circular saw to make the plugs, but after that I had to go and search around for those plugs because they were flying everywhere. That saw was way too powerful for those little things. That's why I'm doing them by hand here, but after that off camera I tried jigsaw. What can I say? If you ever need some plugs and you have a jigsaw, use it. It's way faster and they don't fly away. No matter how good plugs fill the holes, there's always some grooves or gaps around. So to fill them up, instead of using a wood filler afterwards, I use epoxy glue. This is a cheap epoxy glue from dollar store and it works just perfect. I tape the holes from inside of the drawers and then I add a little bit of epoxy glue into the holes just in case. And once I put the plug inside, I poured some epoxy around to fill up those gaps. And I repeated the same process to the all 4 drawers. Some of the plugs are a bit longer and you can see the access, but I'm not worried about this because it's pretty easy to sand them down later. A hardening time for the glue is 5 minutes, but I usually wait for 15 before I sand it. Once epoxy hardened, I sanded the excess of my plugs and some glue with 120 grit sandpaper, and then I scuff sanded all 4 drawers. To recreate the grooves in the plugs, first I used the saw, and then I sanded it with a little file. I know that to make door fronts for those laminated dressers, they usually use some wood, some pieces of wood glued together, like random pieces. And pretty often that wood was not the best quality. Nobody cared about the wood grain because those pieces were going to be laminated anyways. But sometimes you can find pretty beautiful wood grain underneath, even if those little planks were glued together. So I was hoping for that. And one of the drawers fronts wasn't too bad. But the other one, they even used different type of wood on that drawer front. And in the middle, you can see pretty intense wood pattern. It's probably where the branch started growing. Sometimes I don't really care about those little imperfections and I go for that rustic look, but in this case, I wanted something different. It's been probably a year since I bought that pretty rosewood veneer. I wanted to use that veneer so bad, but I was looking for the right piece and I could never find it. I measured and I cut 2 pieces of veneer for my 2 drawers, and then I decided to try a new technique of applying the veneer. And honestly, I think I will never do it again. I needed to apply a generous amount of wood glue to the surface, then let it dry, and then using the iron, apply the veneer. The heat was supposed to melt the glue and the best adhesion was supposed to happen. So I applied the glue. And while it was drying, I moved on to other 2 drawers. Because I exposed some bare wood while I was sanding, I decided to apply shellac, but I couldn't find it. With moving to a new place, packing and unpacking everything, I was absolutely sure that my shellac was in the cabinet, but it disappeared. So instead, I decided to use a polyurethane, and it worked. While my drawers were drying, I flipped the dresser on its back and I took off the legs. And I also decided to take off the plates because they were pretty dirty and rusty. Then I scuff sanded the body of the dresser using 120 grit sandpaper and everything looked good until I got to the top. I found out that what I thought would be a cracks in the top coat, it turned out that those cracks went through the whole laminate. And they were located not in just one area, they were all over the top. The top was made out of 1/4-inch plywood with wooden frame and I was planning to scuff sand and paint it, but in this case I had to sand the whole top. Because otherwise, those cracks, even if they were not that deep, they would be visible no matter how good I prime and how many coats of paint I apply. And trust me, instead of spending about 1 hour of sanding, I try to scrape it and use paint stripper. Didn't work. And there we go, within 1 hour, the top is done. And I totally forgot about my drawers. When I looked at them, it seemed like the wood soaked in all glue, so I decided to apply another pretty thick coat of glue. And again, I left it to dry. Meanwhile, I found a little crack on the top. It went through the plywood, through the top ply. To fill it up, I applied some wood filler. I noticed that on one side the board came off the frame, so I squeezed some wood glue in there, and then I clamped it and let it dry. Inside of one of the drawers, I found that large ink stain. I tried to use some cleaner, but it didn't work, so I sanded it with 180 grit sandpaper, and it was almost gone. By that time, the wood glue on the drawers was completely dry, and I started applying my veneer to it. I found it more convenient to work with wood glue than with contact cement because you can play with your veneer without getting it stuck. Then I used a piece of parchment paper, and I started applying heat to it. It seemed like it was working pretty good. My veneer was gluing to the surface, but for some reason only in the middle. The edges, they didn't want to stick. So I had to go around the edges a couple of times, applied more pressure, and it seemed like it was working. But honestly, it took me way more time than if I would be working with contact cement. I set the drawers aside to cure and I got back to the top. On the top, I didn't want any wood grain to be visible through the paint, so I needed to sand it as smooth as possible. It's been already sanded with 120, so I moved on to 180. And while I was sanding, I realized that I had a wood grain filler on hand. I used it in one of my restorations and I didn't like the result because it looked pretty plasticky, but in this case, it would be a perfect solution. So there we go, I'm applying the grain filler. I decided to do that before final sanding with 220. And I didn't expect that, but in this case, it worked pretty good. Maybe because the wood grain was not really deep, not like in walnut, but it worked. I left everything to dry over the night, my drawers and the top, and in the morning, first thing first, I sanded the top. And you can't see it in the video, but it was so smooth, like buttery smooth. I just loved it. I wish everything went smooth with the drawers, but it didn't. I started cutting the excess of the veneer and I realized that the edges were not glued. I mean, they were, but they were coming off pretty easily. I mean, look at this. I could just peel the veneer until a certain point in the middle, so I had to fix it. I reapplied the wood glue on the edges again and I just left it to dry. And this time it worked. So what can I say about this technique? I'm not gonna do that again. I think I will possibly use the wood glue instead of using contact cement because I'm stuck at it. But I'm not gonna apply, then let it dry, then use an iron. I'm just gonna apply the wood glue and apply veneer on top of it. Finally, I was done with the drawers and I was ready to paint the rest of the dresser. But priming first, of course. I started with the drawers and I decided to put primer in those grooves using the small brush. But then I realized that it was useless because, like, how can the paint not safe in there? It's impossible. Nobody's going to touch inside of those grooves, and there's no way for the paint to peel out of those grooves. So I stopped doing that and I primed the whole drawer without going into the grooves. And then I primed the whole piece and the top. And I was so happy with the top. It was so satisfying to apply the primer because the surface was so smooth and no wood grain bleeding through the primer. Not at all. I didn't know that I was about to screw this up. I pictured this dresser in a dark navy blue color. I love this color and it's trendy now. It's one of the colors in Benjamin Moore color palette for 2024, but I was not gonna buy it. But if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I love to use whatever I have on hand instead of buying a new can of paint. And I also love mixing different colors of paint together to get my own custom color. I always have black paint on hand, and so it happened I had bright blue and some green paint leftovers. In my first batch, I mixed too much of green paint, so I had to start over again. Some blue color, some black, a little bit of green, and also I added red color, and there we go. Perfect navy blue color is ready. First, I drained the paint into my tray. I always do that, even if I don't use a spray gun, and especially if I mix the paint, just in case to prevent any lumps or any other stuff. And then I applied my first coat of the paint, but before I did that, I lightly sanded all surfaces I was going to paint with 400 grit sandpaper. I always do that, but for some reason almost always forget to film it. And here's where I made a mistake. If you noticed, I'm applying the paint using microfiber roller. I usually use foam rollers, but I was out of them. And let's face it, I was lazy because it was so cold outside. Our cold weather just came and it was like minus 28. So I decided to use those microfiber rollers. Like I forgot why I haven't been using them for a while. And with the first coat, everything looked fine. Once the first coat dried, I applied a second coat, but again, I sanded in between coats with 400 grit sandpaper. I know you probably can't believe that, but this time I filmed it. With the second coat, I finally remembered why I don't use microfiber rollers. My finish started reminding an orange peel. Not exactly, but this is the best way to explain it. It wasn't completely smooth. The other thing, because it was cold outside, my furnace was running pretty much all the time. And my paint was drying so fast, it didn't have enough time to level itself. So I diluted my paint with water a little bit to extend the drying time, and I applied the third coat, and I was hoping for the best. But the best didn't happen. And the worst, I was almost out of paint. I was so mad at myself, I was so frustrated, and at that moment, I didn't even want to share my fail with you guys. I was just gonna finish the piece without telling you the whole story and show you the final results. So I didn't even film myself sanding the whole top and reapplying the final coat. And my last coat wasn't exactly a paint coat because I was almost out of paint. I mixed together polyurethane with leftovers of the paint, applied it, and again was hoping for the best. But then I realized that it's not fair not showing you my fails because it can happen to anyone. And we all learn of our mistakes, and I hope maybe you can learn of my mistake. And if there is someone who made exactly the same mistake, sometimes it's just good to know that you're not alone. Oh, and I cleaned the brackets and I sanded the legs off camera as well. And while the top was drying, I stained my legs. I was trying to match my veneer undertone and I used bare wood stain in the color Special Walnut. It was pretty close, but not quite. Once the stain dried, I applied the paint wash. I had on hand paint wash leftovers from my previous project. It was a brown paint with a reddish undertone, so I applied it and it was a perfect match. And again, another fail was this veneer. I decided to sand it with 220 grit sandpaper and I didn't realize how thin it was. So I sanded through the veneer. It happened because I was still a little bit mad at myself and I didn't pay enough attention. And here I was trying to fix my mistake using furniture markers from Home Depot, but you can barely see it because I thought I was doing it on camera, but it turned out that it was off camera. Before applying the top coat, I decided to drill the holes for my new hardware. And I did the same to my painted doors. And if you were wondering how the top turned out, not great. I mean, it was smooth, but it turned out cloudy. Do you guys have any idea why it could happen? Because I don't. I mixed my blue paint with clear poly, and for some reason it's cloudy. I decided just to move on now, finish the other parts of the dresser, and go from there. As a top coat for my wooden drawers, I decided to use Rubium monocoat. I mixed together 3 parts of the oil and 1 part of the accelerator, stirred it pretty good and applied to the drawers. And I can tell that I wouldn't recommend to apply this veneer to anyone, because once the veneer soaked in the oil, it was acting pretty much like paper. You know, in Belarus, the wallpapers are pretty popular. Here in Canada, the walls are mostly painted, or if it's a wallpaper, it's usually peel and stick wallpaper. In Belarus, it's mostly a paper, and you have to buy a special glue, apply it to the wall or sometimes to the wallpaper and glue it to the wall. And because the glue is usually water-based and the wallpaper are made out of paper, sometimes there can be bubbles in there, but once the glue dries, the bubbles disappear and the wallpaper gets flat. Same with this veneer, it started bubbling here and there, but the only difference, my glue was dry. Anyways, I couldn't do anything with this at the moment, so I left it to dry over the night. And I also applied Rubio to my legs. I mean to the dresser's legs. I came back to my drawers in 12 hours. The bubbles disappeared, but I knew that they were there. And I decided to apply more heat to the veneer. I know that my Rubio wasn't fully cured, but I just had to do something with those bubbles. Once I was done with the drawers, I flipped the dresser on its back and attached the blades and the legs. Next, I attached the new hardware and I was pretty much done except for the top. It was kinda dead end for now because I was out of paint and I had to mix a new batch, but there were no chances that I would mix exactly the same color. I was already so tired of working with this dresser and I needed to switch to something else for a couple of days. But I really wanted to post this video in time, so I decided to show you the final results as is. So here's a quick reminder of how this dresser looked before, and this is how it looks now. And to be honest with you, I love how this dresser turned out, even if it's not quite finished yet. I love the combination of navy blue color and this rosewood veneer. I promised I will do my best and I mixed a similar color to repaint the whole thing. And I'm absolutely in love with this hardware. I think it looks perfect. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and see you in my next video.